This meeting is being recorded.
There you go.
Oh, okay. Well, Mark, welcome to this webinar of the Metaforum. Thank you for being with us. As I was saying to you earlier, we've been working in this topic. We're beginning to work in this topic in the Metaforum, and as I guess that most of the systems and cybernetics community, we have enormous amount of questions about artificial intelligence and in particular, how is it gonna affect, improve, help us to evolve organizational cybernetics. So we are just full of questions and full of excitement with your talk.
Well, damn it, Angela, that's a bad way to start because I don't know.
Well, that's right. No one knows. So we are all learning. We are all learning. I don't know if you want to say a little bit also about you for those of people here that may not know about you, and then it's all yours. We have, as usual, more or less 45 minutes to the talk, and then another 45 minutes for the questions. You decide if you are happy to be interrupted or you want just to talk and then have the conversation.
Okay. I probably got too many slides, so I'll just see how it goes. And there's one big thing I want to say, and you know, I think we're clearly at a very important stage in technological history, if not social history. So I work currently for the University of Manchester in the Centre for Occupational and Environmental Health, which I have to say has been a very good home for me. And that's partly because I spent a lot of my career looking at education, really at a time when education seems to have got worse and worse. So I think I've decided to focus on something else. And maybe that will get worse and worse. But the thing I'm really interested in is health. And it's health that took me into AI because I was previously at the University of Liverpool. And I got involved in a medical diagnostics project as there were a lot of them around. And it was actually an educational technique where we were able to create a very radical and effective solution, which has now been turned into a company. So I started, before I was involved in that, I was an AI skeptic, like a lot of cyberneticians, and I've been a cybernetician for a long time. I was kind of, you know, I was very much of the sort of Winograd and Flores mindset that somehow there was some sort of deep philosophical error in this stuff, and I still think that. But through working on the project that I was working on, it was quite obvious that there was something very new about this technology as a technical architecture, and something that frankly nobody understood. And at that point was really reinforced to me by a very good AI developer who said, you know, we know how to make this, but we don't know why it works. And I thought, well, that's extremely interesting then, isn't it? So we need to pay attention to these things where we don't know why they work. And the presentation I'm going to give today is a set of connections which I think can be made between many important figures in intellectual history, not just in cybernetics, but in psychology. And since we have this new technology, that's a key opportunity to revisit some of those more ancient ideas. And I suppose if there's one question which is really dominating my concerns at the moment, it's this, and I wonder if anybody can guess who said this. We've developed a psychometry of individual differences rather than a psychometry of personal adjustment to life. We treat people as data points and we don't see them as organisms. And I think this is something that absolutely, you know, Stafford really was thinking about organizations as organisms. He obviously saw people as organisms. And one of the great frustrations was that that wasn't how most researchers, most scientists actually saw human beings. Any ideas who said that? It's not a test, I'll tell you. It was George Kelly. I think if Elena was here, she'd recognize it, because Elena was instrumental in introducing Stafford to the ideas of George Kelly when he was doing disintegration. But it's so interesting. And, you know, the other thing I was thinking was that cybernetics in many ways is a difficult subject for people, because we have all these concepts, you know, this revolving sort of set of concepts, and they're all interconnected. And actually, there is no straightforward way of approaching all of these things where you can separate the connections between all the concepts. It's a bit like in music. I mean, my first degree was in music, and it always puzzled me that we were taught harmony and counterpoint, and sometimes, you know, someone would talk about melody. We created these categories, and we say, now you've got to do harmony, and now you've got to do counterpoint, and now you've got to do something else. And you think, well, where's the difference? They're all connected. So it's almost as if the linear way in which we approach this stuff really gets in the way. And that's one of the most interesting things about AI, because it is very clearly non-linear. And that's a real opportunity if we use it right. But I've spent the day in an education seminar in my university, and the burning desire to take this technology and turn it into something linear is absolutely palpable and rather depressing. It's quite funny, actually, to see it happen. I don't know if it will succeed, but let's hope it doesn't. I think in terms of approaching AI, the most sensible, rational way to see it is as a new kind of scientific instrument, which we actually don't really know what it's for yet. We don't really know. It's almost like, you know, if you can imagine the first lenses that were ground and people looked through them and they thought, oh, I wonder what that is. You know, maybe it's a frisbee. Maybe it's, well, they wouldn't have known what a frisbee is. You know what I mean? But once we do work out what scientific instruments are, they do something for us. And really what they do is they reveal to us some kind of deeper order in nature. And I think we will probably eventually settle on an AI as also a tool to reveal a deeper order in nature. And if you think about that at a very deep level, what is happening through a scientific instrument, whether it's AI or whether it's a telescope or a microscope, is that there is some kind of transduction going on. This word of, you know, which is really fundamentally concerned with the conversion of energy from one form to another. It can also be the conversion of variety from one form to another, from maybe something which appears disordered to something which appears more ordered through the lens that we look. That's very, very important in our whole scientific development. And I think this may be why AI turns out to be key to whatever the next stage of our scientific development is. And it is a different kind of lens. It is not a two-dimensional lens, you know, in the sense that you can take a telescope. Galileo took a telescope and pointed it at the moon and started drawing the moon. It was the drawings of the moon were just as important as the lens through which he was looking. But that was a two-dimensional vision of nature. I think AI is probably four-dimensional, and it's showing us things which we frankly have failed to be able to apprehend before now. But I think that's what's going on. And so just to emphasize, this transduction point is so important. I got this from Designing Freedom. It's a lovely diagram. And, you know, really, when you're introducing this stuff, this is the picture that you start with. You know, you've got a complex world out there with very high variety, and you've got an entity like us or some organism which has much less variety. So you've got to do two things. And you have to have both of them. You have to attenuate, and that means basically you try and select the information that's important to you. I know you know this stuff, but it's worth emphasizing this. And then you have to amplify. Now, and I always found that attenuation was quite easy to understand because attenuation is selection. It's, you know, I'm going to ignore this bit and I'm going to concentrate on this bit. And the trick, of course, is to make sure that you're not throwing away stuff which is really important. But amplification is much harder because it's not just, you know, turning up the volume. It's doing something to the complex system that you're in, which reflects something that you know, and which contributes to the creation of some kind of niche within that complex system within which you can survive. And I thought the best metaphor sometimes is maybe a spider. And the spider's amplification is you know, doing something big that it knows. Well, that's spinning a web. And in so doing, of course, they create a niche within the complex environment. And through that niche, they're then able to select the information so they're able to attenuate in an effective way and adapt to that environment. And the reason why I think amplification is important is that really that's what AI is doing. It's an amplification technology. And I'm going to go into a bit more detail as to exactly what that means. At a technical level, what it really means is it generates redundancy. It is redundancy technology. And that is, in a very deep way, that's an opposite of information technology, if you think about it. I mean, obviously, this is the same diagram, but it's perhaps a bit more relevant to the context that we find ourselves. We're inhabiting a very complex environment of technology, and we're going to see, it's obviously been going on for a very long time, but we're going to see it now amplified, is the fact that we're going to see a plethora of new tools, new devices, goodness knows what, all doing new things, all creating new options. But many of those options are for things that we could do before. So you're seeing this massive increase in the potential redundancy in the environment. And of course, we're sat there, which technologies do I choose? And fundamentally, of course, there's a lot of uncertainty with this. And, you know, when people talk about techno stress, as many of the colleagues that I work with in the Centre for Occupational Health are very concerned with techno stress. It is this sheer uncertainty of being overwhelmed with options, unable to actually select which technologies to use. But of course, the transduction loop is there. And on the one hand, our attenuators at the top there, well, we're selecting the data, we're attenuating reality. And if you work for an institution, they'll do it for you. And in terms of amplification, before we had AI, we always had technology amplifiers in the sense of, you know, generating new representations of data, you know, different kinds of ways of presenting information about the world, like VR and those kinds of things. But all of that stuff, new visualizations, for example, those are all amplifiers. Or even generating pictures of black holes from data. That's also that is an amplification process. And of course, the world of technology that we often live in is the form, the online form that we have to fill in, that you can't type in the stuff that you really want to say. You can only type in the stuff that actually fits in the boxes. And the same goes for the sensors that are monitoring our faces and our movements and goodness knows what. It's picking out the information that the designers have just determined. So that's an attenuative process. But this transduction doesn't quite work. There's something going wrong. And, you know, I'll say something about the sort of the deeper social malaise that we're in towards the end of this presentation, but it is a direct consequence of this stuff. Now, there is a risk. AI makes this all worse. It produces a massive increase in the variety of options, and we find it even more difficult to negotiate this space. I hope that isn't what happens. And I hope that what I say contributes to a discussion where we try to think of doing something differently. Okay, so I've done lots of these kinds of presentations, and I always try to illustrate what I do with some latest ridiculous tool. So I've been doing a lot of programming with ChatGPT, and so this is a personal transducer, and you can try it. It probably will break, so if it does, be patient, because I've literally I'm still playing with it, and I'm doing it to try and address that question that George Kelly raised, which is, let's just get this running, sorry. Okay, now I'll give you the link, which is to try and chat. Oh, here, sorry. To try and, oops, oh, that'll do. That should work, that link. To try and address this challenge that Kelly raised, which was, how do we stop? How do we treat people as organisms rather than treat them as data points? And this is trying to do it. What I wanted to do was to create an AI that became curious about you. So on the left-hand side, if you just click on this link and load it up, it will start to ask you questions. Who are you? Where do you work? What are you interested in? So, what's your name and occupation? Could you share some of your interests and hobbies? Curious about your particular skills, develop further. So I'm going to say, I'm Mark, and I'm a cybernetician. It's a bit like Alcoholics Anonymous, but not quite. Now, as I'm talking to this thing that's asking me questions, on the right-hand side of the screen, it's going to try and create a virtual me. So I've now got Mark the cybernetician, passionate about understanding and developing systems, and I can talk to the virtual me as well. So it's two different conversations. So apparently, well, actually, that's fairly accurate for how I feel today, I have to say. But of course, I don't quite have the full picture of who I am here, so I'm going to give it a bit more information. I love the music of Messiaen, and I like to go walking, just random stuff, you see. And so it will now update its version of me. So it will produce a new version, and I can talk to him, and I can ask, tell me. I don't live in Portland, so I'll change that as well. Tell me about your hobbies. And this is interesting. This was designed as an alternative to giving people questionnaires or surveys that say, tell us your name, what job do you do? Because they're so, they're so unadaptive. They're so constraining in terms of what you can say and what you can't. And what you really want to have with people is a conversation. So in a sense, this is a way of trying to actually get similar information out of people, but by doing it by having a conversation. Of course, this makes you think of Gordon Pask's work, and all of that stuff was really good. It's just that we haven't been able to really try it out and test it in the wild in this kind of way before. We needed this technology to come along so that we could actually try some of that stuff out, and it's okay. You can take it so far. I was doing it with a colleague yesterday, and we were creating someone who was really having some dark thoughts about his work. And my colleague, who's very senior in the health and safety executive, said, well, the thing is, they can't quite get to the devil in these people, and it's true. It can't quite get to that because it is probably capable of doing it. It's just that would upset OpenAI's investors if you really created people who were too realistic. But it's interesting. And just to prove that this can sort of collect information about me, I've got a little feature there which will start to sort of list my skills, my interests, integrating theoretical frameworks, practical applications. I haven't said anything about my time for study. Critical thinking, walking in nature, dislikes, rapid spread of misinformation. It made that up. Hey, it's fairly accurate. You get the idea. So I suppose the question is, what is happening? What is happening in the relationship between me and this system and the data that the system is generating, and actually how the hell is it doing any of this in the first place? But I hope you can see, there's something interesting here, something important. Okay, let's get back to my slides. So I want to talk about amplification because, as I said earlier, that is the main game. Why is AI different? It is built differently. And anybody who comes from this part of England knows, as the birthplace of the Industrial Revolution, when things are built differently, lots of stuff changes. It really does take a different technical architecture to change things. And the closest technology that you can sort of relate to AI is a database, but it is not a database. But just to illustrate the point, you put data in, you get data out. The data you get out is data either you put in or somebody else put in. The internet's a database, basically. AI isn't that. AI relies on a model, which is effectively a file. And the file is created. Well, there's another point, actually. I hate PowerPoint. Databases are effectively attenuative. They select. That's what you do when you write a query. You select. But the AI model is much more capable of amplifying. It produces multiple descriptions of the same thing. In fact, it works on the basis of multiple descriptions of the same thing. How's the model file made? Well, you take the database, which we've now filled up with all sorts of stuff from our minds, including pictures and words and goodness knows what. And we run a statistical process on that data called a training algorithm. And the training algorithm reduces the relationships between pixels or the relationships between words to sets of numbers, which are effectively integrals. And it's a kind of matrix that can be presented then with new data. So new data that it hasn't been trained on, and it makes a prediction. And so, and actually this basic architecture, this basic idea is more than 10 years old now. And this is the technology, for example, that underpinned the AI diagnostics work that I was doing. And the models that generate words, the large language models, are an evolution of that basic technique. Fundamentally, it's the same idea, just a different kind of data and a different kind of processing. Here's another way of thinking about it, that you have a training algorithm. The training algorithm produces a model file. The model file makes predictions. And the other thing to say about this stuff is that the predictions that a model file will make are noisy. I'll show this in a minute. I've got a way of demonstrating it. They're always noisy. So, and that's a very key feature of AI. It is noisy. And although it's deterministic to a point, it doesn't feel like it when you're using it. So in order to address the noise, there's quite a lot of effort that goes on in statistically removing it, statistically manipulating the results that you get from the AI to get a result that meets the expectations of people. Meeting the expectations of people is also very important, because if it didn't do that, we wouldn't be interested. Just to think about ChatGPT in this context, because ChatGPT is not saying, this image is a cat or this image is a dog. It's saying the next word in this sequence of words is, and it's producing a list of words with probabilities associated with it. And the statistics is so important, because the statistics is choosing which the best word it thinks is. And it's not necessarily the word with the highest probability. That word gets chosen, it gets added to the body of text that was originally input, and then of course it sends the whole thing back into the process again. And that's what happens with ChatGPT. These days it happens so quickly that you can hardly see it working. But I'm going to show you an offline version of ChatGPT where you can see it happening very, very explicitly. Mentioning offline, of course, I've made the point in this diagram that the training process takes data from the internet. That's where most of the data is. But the model doesn't have to sit on the internet. It can sit offline. It can do everything that it does on your own device. And which is a surprise for people, because many people think, well, I log on to ChatGPT, it's an internet tool. It must be consulting the internet in some way. It isn't. It's completely self-contained in its ability to predict the next word. Let's okay, so I'm going to take you through this. So this is not words, this is pictures. And this tool was created for children. Nothing illustrates the basic principles of AI better than this. So I'm going to browse to this link. I'll paste it in the chat if I can find it. Here we are. There we are. So it's the Teachable Machine. Does anybody know this? Anybody put their hands up if they know this tool? It is fabulous, to be honest. And I use it all the time. And okay. Yeah, it looks like this. You click on Get Started. I'm going to do an image project and a standard image model. Now, what I have to do in Zoom is turn my camera off, otherwise it won't work, because I want to turn my camera on in here. And what I am going to, well, I've got some objects here. I've got some books. How about this one? I'm gonna record this book. And so I'm going to hold down the record button, move it around, maybe show the other side of it as well, so that it really that will confuse it. Actually, that would be interesting. Right, there we go. So I've got 200 and something images there. Why do I need 200 and something images, and why do I wiggle it around when I'm doing this? Well, that's an interesting question. And I also have a box of an Apple Pencil, and I'm going to do the same thing. Actually, not a big Apple fan, but hey, we've got an Apple Pencil in front of me, so I'm going to whoops, let's just hold that down, and then I'm going to wiggle this around, move it in, move it out, move it around, blah 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 blah. There we are. Isn't that great? Okay. And basically, so that's data, and I need a lot of it, and I'm going to train a model. That means I'm going to run that statistical algorithm on all of this data, and I'm going to make a file. Because Google run this, and they have very, very big servers, they're able to do this very quickly. If you were running this on your own computer, it would take hours. But eventually, he says, now, of course, the common denominator in both of these images is my head, but it should be able to overlook that. But of course, it will be part of its own mechanism for identifying this stuff. Just give it a second. Wait. Wait again. Hope it's not going to take too long. I've done this many, many times. It's never failed to work. So it would be typical. Okay, well, might leave that to Cook, actually. And I'll tell you what we would see if it comes back. It will come back eventually, I think. What we would see is you would see a window pop up on the right-hand side, and the camera will be live, and I can hold up my book of Platform for Change or my Apple Pencil, and it will immediately be able to tell the difference between the two. It will also be very confused if it looks at my face and I'm not holding up either the Apple Pencil or the book. It will be very confused if that happens. So let's see if we've got it there yet. Yeah. Okay. And anyway, let's let me get to the point, because this is important. So you can see I've done the same process here. I've trained it to recognize a mug, a pen, and a phone. And at the moment that I've frozen it here is useful because it's got it wrong. It thinks that my pen is a phone. And that really is an illustration of the fact that this stuff is noisy. There's a lot of contingency, stuff that gets in the way in terms of it making an effective prediction. And the noise is important because the real point that I'm going to make in this presentation is about topology. And noise is a very interesting topological concept. It's also a very important concept in cybernetics because von Förster particularly, and now it turns out not just him, argued that you could get organization from noise. And so the noise is important. So that the confusion that the AI gets into is instrumental in the way that it works. It's also instrumental in the way that AI improves, because it's the noise and the uncertainty surrounding it which is driving the developers to develop new techniques for improving the statistical operation of it. Of course, what do we have over noise? We have signals. The signal is the category that it's delivering. In this case, it's the wrong category, but it is the category that it's delivering. The really key thing, though, is what we have with the data is redundancy. This is redundancy technology. It requires massive amounts of data, which is basically different perspectives on the same thing. This is actually a huge problem if you're doing medical AI, because if you take a disease like diabetic retinopathy, which is what I was involved in, the most common approach to using AI to diagnose that is to take the different stages of a disease or the different features and to create different categories for each of those different features. Like I've got, the pen and the phone here. Problem is that you don't have the same number of images for each feature. So some particular stages of disease, actually, there's not very much data at all for them. And that can create real problems in the way that the AI is able to process this stuff. Let's just see if it's come back. Oh, gosh, it's being very, very slow. You can see it is gradually doing it, so it will come back at some point. So, these labels, noise, signal, redundancy, they should be familiar to people, particularly anybody who's interested in information theory. But there's one other dimension here, which is me, because I'm observing this stuff. And my expectation as to what the AI should do because I compare it to my own intelligence. That's also another dimension to this. So we have noise, we have signal, we have the redundancy that's in the data, and then we have my own expectation. Those are key things. If any of those dimensions aren't present, we don't have what we do. We don't have this effective selection of words that actually does something useful to us. I cannot sort of emphasize this enough. And these are in a topological relation to one another. Are we done yet? Oh, yes, we are. Okay, so just to prove the point, it seems a bit labored now, but anyway. So there's my face, and here's the book, and it knows it's a book, and there's the pen, and it knows it's a pen. Book, pen, book. There we go. You've got the idea. Okay, just to prove that it's a model, that it's a file, I can click on Export Model, and I can download this thing. Download my model. I've done this so many times. I've got so many copies of this particular file, but it will come in a second. Come on. Okay, even that's going a bit slow. Never mind. It will download a zip file, and within that zip file, there will be a small file which is called weights, and that is basically the AI. You can download it onto your own device, and it will just do its thing. So, so you get the idea. I'm just mindful of time, so I want to show you this. This is important. So this is to prove the point that you do not need to use this stuff on the web. So this is offline ChatGPT. It's called GPT for All. It's actually just a wrapper around an open source large language model that was developed by Facebook. It can also do other large language models, but this is pretty mind-blowing. Now, my party trick here would normally be to turn off the internet, which of course in an online presentation is not a terribly good idea. But I can say, you know, tell me a joke. Tell me a joke about cybernetics. Let's do that. Kind of curious to know what it's going to come up with now. So you can see it's much slower, and this is because it's going around that loop that I showed you of selecting words. Why did the cybernetic engineer break up with his girlfriend? Because she was always trying to feedback him, but he just couldn't process their relationship anymore. Okay, well, yeah. I can hear you laughing now, and it's wonderful. Okay, here's another way of looking at this. Now, you remember that 3D diagram and that had all those concepts. In a sense, we're sort of revolving around the same concepts, but coming from different angles. A huge amount of my thinking about AI was influenced by Lot Leidersdorf. I don't know if anybody here knew Lot, but I knew him for a long time, and we worked together for a bit. I learned a huge amount. And a lot of his work revolved around the interface between Shannon's information theory and Nicholas Luhmann's social systems theory. And his last book, which is this one. Oh, I better stop my camera in the other screen. Let's just close that, sorry. And then I've got the screen here. Yes, his last book was The Evolutionary Dynamics of Discursive Knowledge. And there is this diagram in that book, which is, I think, probably the best diagram in the book. So he starts with Shannon's famous information diagram. And the interesting thing is, we never really talked about this, but the most important, the thing that really stands out in this diagram is the noise. Nobody ever talks about the noise in information theory, but it's without the noise, nothing else happens. It's absolutely crucial. But of course, what you've got the signal. And the whole point of Shannon is to say we've got to transfer these signals over a noisy channel. How do you overcome the noise? You need redundancy. And then Lote started to think about this because he was seeing the same principles operate, not just at the engineering level of, signals being transmitted over wires, but he then looked in the mathematical theory of communication. Warren Weaver wrote this very brilliant introduction saying, I think this is very much more important than engineering, or not just about engineering, it's about something bigger. And he proposed, Weaver, an additional idea about human communication, which he said, well, there's also semantic noise. And there are semantic messages being exchanged which sit above this engineering level. And at their level, of course, there are also causes and correlations. That's redundancy. It's the patterns that we share, the patterns that we understand about each other as we communicate. And then Lote went one level further, thinking about the work of Nicholas Luhmann and saying, well, those patterns have an underlying topology, an underlying rationale, which are the Luhmann codes of communication that some people are talking about cybernetics, some people are talking about economics, some people are talking about law, some people are falling in love and goodness knows what. And I think very importantly, Lote identified that sharing of expectations at that highest level of communication was a form of mutual redundancy. It was the fact that my underlying patterns, which underpin my communication, have some overlap with yours. And at that moment, we know that we're both talking about cybernetics, or we know that we're both feeling the same way about something. It's a much deeper idea. This is, and I tried to say this, and unfortunately, Lote is no longer with us, and he was quite ill by the time that this occurred. But we were doing this work at the same time as I was doing the AI work in diabetic retinopathy. And I was saying, this is the same stuff. And I really think that's probably very important. And it's also worth saying something about noise, because noise is and has been a crucial topic in cybernetics. This is this very, very famous, my favorite cybernetics paper of all time is von Foerster's on self-organizing systems and their environment. And what does he say in there? He says, you can get order from noise. And that idea has been picked up much more recently by biologists. So Raymond and Dennis Noble have produced a whole raft of empirically grounded work looking at the way in which what they call stochasticity, which is another word for it really, affects biological organization. And so, and, I'm a musician, and I kind of think, well, of course, if you have noise, every musical instrument creates noise. In fact, you can isolate the noise and just have the noise without the rest of it. And it sounds like this. This is the first Bach cello. I don't know if you can hear that, but it's a bit faint. You get the idea. So that's just the kind of scraping and the stuff that goes on. If you take that stuff out of the music, it loses all its life. And I wrote a paper about this and relating it to John Torday's work, which was published last year. If you're interested, that's there seems to be something here, and it relates also to AI. So when I say there's a topology, that's a way of saying, well, there's something which is effectively a scalar. And I'm suggesting perhaps in this diagram that the noise is a scalar. It's, you either have a lot of noise or you don't. You have signals. Well, signals have basically value and direction. So in that sense, they're mathematical vectors. What's redundancy? Well, redundancy is basically a set of constraints over a range of signals. It's like a grammar. So you say, in this language or in this form of communication, we have more weight placed on this letter than on this letter. And if we didn't have that, then of course, it would just be gibberish and we wouldn't be able to interpret it. So you need constraint, you need the redundancy. But what is that? That is constraint over the signals. That's another vector over the other vector. In mathematical terms, you can say that's a bivector. And then I think the really key one is the business of expectation, which is about, if Lotte is right, it's about the relations between different people's redundancies. And so that's a vector on top of all of those three. So you end up with this three-dimensional form, which I think is very interesting to think about in terms of not just the way that AI might work, but the way that we work. And I'm thinking, okay, so what's the difference? What's the difference between what AI does and what we do? And I'm glad John's here because we've talked a lot about this, John Torday. AI, yes, it's noisy, but it is not tuned into the universe. It is basically a rock. It's silicon. Whereas we are. But we can communicate with it because we have this sort of we have this topological similarity to what we do. So we exchange noise and signal and redundancy with it. That's in our interactions with it. And we're always coordinating our expectations. That's what we were doing when I was showing you that initial transducer, the personal transducer. But the noise is much deeper in us. And I think this may remain a key difference between what humans are and what computers are. And we're going to need to think about that in terms of how we move ahead with this stuff, because there will be plenty of zealots who say the AI can replace humans, just as we've had plenty of zealots in the past trying to sell us technologies which will do what humans do. And it is true that the technology can do some of the functions that humans do, and including writing now, of course, but it is not true that it is the same. And that distinction is really, really critically important. The other thing to say about this is that there is to borrow sort of a term from quantum mechanics, really, which is to say that there is a local world that we inhabit where we are talking with each other. You know, I'm talking with you now. But there is a much deeper non-local world, which is contained within our own physiology. And that relationship between the local and non-local is a very profound thing. It goes right to the heart of physics. It also goes now to the heart of biology as well. I have talked now for over 45 minutes, so I can go on with this, there are many more examples I can talk about in terms of this topological essence of AI. But maybe I want to stop at this point because these are my key points really, and just get a feel for the reaction.
Thank you, Mark. I mean, you are welcome to close the loop as you wish. We don't need to stick to the 45 minutes. So you just close whenever you want to start the conversation.
Okay. Well, I'll keep going for another couple of minutes, and I can't actually remember what the next slide is, but let's find. It's always a surprise of, oh no, but this slide is interesting. Okay. It's always good to be surprised by PowerPoint, isn't it? I think, all right, I will stop at this slide because I think this is quite controversial, perhaps. As cyberneticians, we like to think of ourselves as constructivists, certainly as educational cyberneticians, which I've always considered myself. Constructivism has been a big thing. And yet, I've always struggled with this because I thought, well, what's constructed exactly? And people say, oh, it's knowledge, isn't it? Or it's, you know, your experience of reality. It's constructed, right? And you think, well, how and where and why and what do you mean? And I think that's a very legitimate question. I've just written a paper for Constructivist Foundations, and it drove me slightly crazy, I have to say, because they were so, maybe I shouldn't say this, but there's a certain sort of, how to put it, you cannot talk about reality. Because that's, you know, everything is sort of languaging, and everything is, you know, all of the second order cybernetic stuff, and this kind of okay, this is going to get me into trouble. This has you begin to feel that you're part of a cult rather than a science. And yet this issue of constructivism is the alternative is a kind of naive realism. We don't want that. And for a while I was interested in other forms of realist philosophy, but I don't think that's right either. So the many conversations I had with Lote, who would consider himself a constructivist, was, what are we talking about? And his answer to this, is fairly late on, was that what is constructed is the selection mechanism. Is the mechanism that selects how we communicate. And that selection mechanism fundamentally exists in our physiology. But it is the mechanism of selection that is constructed. It is not the thing that it selects. And that is such, well, I'd be interested to know what people think about that. It seems a very profound position, and one which deserves a more serious philosophical treatment. But actually, in education, we kind of know this. What we try to do with students, for example, is we are basically trying to tune their selection mechanisms. Now, the stronger version of this is to say that a selection mechanism is constructed and has a topological structure. And its topological structure may be of this three-dimensional form of vectors, scalars, bivectors, trivectors. And maybe some of the evidence that reinforces that is the fact that AI can do what it does and we understand it. So if AI is working in this topological framework, are we working in this topological framework too? So you can say, you know, and of course, the other thing, sorry, I should have said, Lote's main concern is of systems which are anticipatory, that can predict what's likely to happen. And that's the whole point of Lote's mutual expectation, that we understand each other. And because we understand each other, we're making predictions about the other. And in fact, this bears on Luhmann, who says, you know, our utterances are dependent on us having a model of each other. We couldn't utter anything unless we understand how the other is selecting their utterance. It's in Ashby. Ashby is saying very much the same thing. Now, that's a natural one. And of course, we've got this artificial one. AI is an artificial anticipatory mechanism constructed for selecting operations to guide human coordination in an environment. So I'm interested to know what people say about this. And, you know, ChatGPT is a selection mechanism for words. It's a noisy selection mechanism for words. So what do we say about knowledge? Because if you're in a university, universities put tremendous store by the words that students select as representative of what they, as a representation of what they know. And of course, this is why ChatGPT has freaked educationalists, or universities particularly, out, is suddenly we can automate that. So there are some questions. Question about constructivism and a question about epistemology. What more do you want? Siobhan's got her hand up.
Exactly. Siobhan, please.
Well, firstly, I'll throw out the question. I'm happy to leave it and just leave it there because I'm not a scientist, I'm not an expert. But what's coming out for me, I suppose, is the question, can AI be quiet? So in silence and in our stillness, it can be extremely creative. This feels quite frenetic.
Yes.
So I'll leave that.
Well, you're spot on. And I think well, I'll tell you the journey I've been on with this, because I had a similar thing. I was using, oh, now can I remember where this thing is? Hume. Has anyone come across Hume.ai? That's fun. So I've got a PhD student who's looking at empathy and AI. There are a number of psychologists who are sort of getting into this stuff. Let me just load this up, because this speaks to what you've basically been saying. if it loads, of course. My computer seems to be running very slowly at the moment. Maybe I'll close that down. Oh, leave. Yeah, but you're quite right about it sounding frenetic. So Hume is designed to be a chatbot that you can speak to and which will pick up on your the emotion in your voice. So I can start talking to this thing and say, hello. I think it's going to really struggle to perform right now. But anyway, let's.
Hello.
Oh, here we go. You can hear it. Hello. So I'm feeling a bit tired because I've been doing a lot of work today.
I hear you. Long work days can really drain the energy. Why don't you tell me about what you've been up to? I'm a great listener, and maybe
Well,
venting a bit
actually,
could
the
help
problem is you're
rejuvenate you.
not a great listener, and
Or
still though
we
you're
could
not
switch
listening to me
gears to
now
something
because I'm
lighter and
talking
more
over
fun
you.
if you need
You
a
get
break from all that work
you get a
stuff.
sense of the problem, don't you? And so I was beginning to think, it can't breathe. You know, it hasn't got lungs, it hasn't got a body, it can't breathe. And certainly this has been a topic between me and John Torday for a long time. I'm beginning to wonder about this though, because trees don't breathe in the same way that we do, but they do breathe in another way. So the freneticness and the difficulty that we appear to have with it may be that we just don't understand exactly what's going on. And I don't mean to give it to infer that it's got more life force than it has. But we have to check ourselves when we make these judgments about things. So I think it's a very important question, Siobhan. I'm becoming less sure about it, in the same way that I'm becoming less sure about whether this stuff could be conscious at some point. I just don't even know how we would know. Does that help?
Sorry, thank you, Mark. We have Steve, Miguel, and Stephen waiting with questions. So, Steve.
Me?
Yes.
Oh, hello. Yeah. Thank you, Mark, for a great talk, very thought-provoking. I've got a comment and then a question. Really do have a question. Originally, I balked at your suggestion that kind of an AI could be an information amplifier because, and as we know, computers can only destroy information. But I kind of thought about how does a real amplifier work? You know, it doesn't create energy. It draws energy from a larger energy source, power supply, and then injects that into a circuit and adds energy. So I think an AI can work in a similar way. It draws information from a very much larger source, the whole internet, and then can pump that into your conversation. So it can, it's very similar to a normal kind of valve amplifier, really, but informationally. That's not my question. So my question is about, you're saying that it's about information selection. And I'm thinking, you didn't mention kind of the O word, ontology. So I think of education as about, not about word selection, but as about kind of constructing an ontology with my students, and together we build an ontology of the world based on our physicality, of course. But AI, it seems, I don't know, if it does build ontology, if ChatGPT uses an ontology, we don't have access to that. And that seems to be a problem in our use of these generative AI tools. So what's your thought about, you know, if it does it have this ontology, and
Yes.
why can't we access it?
Well, you can. If you're using ontology
Right.
if you're using ontology in the sense of the category, the underlying categories and networks of concepts, you know, the sort of entailment. Well, it's not really an entailment mesh, but that's that kind of stuff. I'll show you that in a second. I didn't say information, and I didn't say information deliberately because I really don't know what it is. I think the process is transduction, and the process of transduction involves attenuation and amplification in the way that Beer describes. And I'm on the Foundations of Information Science list. I don't know if anybody else is here and been on there for many years and watched this conversation about what is information go round and round and round in circles. And the answer, and the thing that I've occasionally tried to say this, is that they're trying to describe something which is three-dimensional in two dimensions. And it's always going to go around in circles like that. You're dealing with a topology. You're dealing with, even the concept of distinction. This is a later slide. It's interesting. I'm glad to see Gerald here because I'd be interested in what he thinks about this. I do not think that a distinction or a boundary is a thing in the sense that it is a thing in the sense that it is a line, it is a point, it is a plane, and it is a space all at once. All at once. And we haven't got our heads around this, but I hope that maybe this technology can help us to understand that, because I think that's very important. So let me tell you about the ontology. So the ontology is effectively inferred by the training process. And it is remarkable. And the way that you get at it is by doing something a little bit like this, which is in a later slide, but it's worth showing you. Oh no, where I put it? Hang on, just bear with me for a second. Sorry, that's the slide deck I'm doing straight after this meeting. Yeah, here we go. I'll just share my screen again. Right, can you see this? So, how are these graphs? How are these graphs produced? Well, and they're a little bit problematic, but they're not bad. Actually, I have to say I was surprised at how good this was. I got ChatGPT to generate 100 different case studies for 100 different occupations. So we ended up with 10,000 different little stories like this. 45-year-old male teacher presents with vocal strain characterized by hoarseness, throat discomfort, blah, blah, blah. Okay. 35-year-old male military officer presents with chronic lower back pain. 35-year-old male database administrator presents with carpal tunnel syndrome. Now, actually, just think about those for a second, because all of them make sense. And I couldn't get it to do one which didn't make sense. So the redundancy is effectively in the training. It's in the constraint of the way that the thing has been trained. And there is a lot of constraint that says this is a likely scenario and this one isn't. Now, once you've generated 10,000 of these, you can then code them. So that was another little algorithm that just went through my 10,000 records and said, okay, so I want to know what condition this is, what occupation, age of the patient. I pulled back a whole list of data, basically. And ChatGPT, the beauty of ChatGPT is, yes, it's a mechanism for selecting words, but some of those words can be code. And some of that code can encode data. So you can very easily create these workflows. And then you just add it all up. And so I created a list of occupations with anxiety and mental health disorders, and we got advertising executives at the top. Weirdly, though, it didn't think doctors were stressed. And many of the doctors I work with were absolutely astonished and rather vexed by that. So, it's not perfect, but it's actually not a million miles out. So if you're looking for some sort of ontology that's sitting behind the training, it is implicit. And that is something which I don't think has been properly grasped, because if this stuff has been trained on the research literature and it has encoded the essential relationships and meaning and constraints behind that research literature, then actually it won't be long before we're we're doing our research exercises in a very different kind of way. So this is very important and very interesting. So thank you for the question.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you, Steve. Really fascinating debate. We have Miguel Marcos.
Oh, you're on mute, Miguel.
Sorry, I think you are muted, Miguel. Now,
Yeah,
sorry.
here we go. Okay, sorry about that. Thanks for the presentation, Mark. So I picked up early on in your presentation the phrase scientific instrument. And so I've been messing around with Claude and Google's models as well. And what strikes me is that there's a great deal of variability, dependability, reliability in these models. And so I was wondering, to me, it kind of surprised me to call it a scientific instrument, because if I used a microscope, I would rely on it and pretty much count on it being 100% every time I used it. Whereas when I go to ChatGPT, like you just said a minute ago with the ontology question, it's not 100% there.
No.
And I'm thinking that not so much as a problem of understanding, but a problem of getting other people to understand what the tool is really about.
Yeah. Okay. So, well, that's exactly why I think it's important. It's noisy. And not only is it noisy, its relationship to the signals that it's generating, the words, the constraint that it imposes upon itself, and the expectation that we have on it, they're all tied together. It's all happening at the same time. That is the essential structure of this different kind of instrument. And in order to use it, you can't really judge anything by what it does at the interface. We're transfixed by the interface. It's very reminiscent of Gordon Pask complaining that what was his phrase? We were hypnotized by the digital computer. And the same thing is happening with this stuff. There's been a whole load of presentations in my university here today about, we can use ChatGPT, when you kind of think you've got to look deeper. You've got to look at the mechanism of selection itself. You can't look at its results. That's where the instrumentality of it is. That's how we ought to be using it. So I hope that makes sense. And you can't do it without programming. It really is important, and it's not difficult now because ChatGPT will write you the code to get you started. But it's about observing this thing as a phenomenon, and then using our theoretical knowledge about communication and cybernetics to make inferences about what it's telling us about ourselves and about the world. I think that's it. I hope that makes sense.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Miguel. We have Steve Bruce.
Hello, Steve.
You're muted,
muted too.
Muted.
Right, can you hear me now, Angela?
Yes, perfectly.
Right. Sorry about that. Yeah. Hi, Mark. Sorry, I only caught maybe the last 10 minutes of your presentation, but I live in the same world as what you do. It's a shame we can't go into a pub afterwards and have a good discussion about it, because I would love to do that. There's thousands of things I could ask, but I'm just going to focus on noise. You made a point, I agree with it. Noise is a scalar, but that's only because of ignorance, right? And the problem with mathematics is the science of patterns, right? And all it means is that when we're looking at the scalar, right, we've got no way of severing the space at the moment other than using mathematics. But if we look at the work of Stephen Wolfram to do with cellular automata, right, and there is rule 30, right? Rule 30. Right. So you're on about really creating trying to get order from noise, right? Well, we can get using rule 30, Mark, we can get noise from order, but that noise is only because of the ignorance of the methods we're using to probe that. And there's no real way we've got of partitioning the space to try and make sense of it. But it's, noise is quite a peculiar thing. But yeah, it was just a sort of making a comment there that, the space that we're working in is infinitely complex anyway. And we have a number of tools to probe that world, but invariably we're always relying on mathematics and machine learning to extract patterns. But why should everything be patternable? Why does noise need to be patternable? But it was just really just a comment. And
Well,
yeah.
no, it's not noise which is patternable. I want to show you something because the Wolfram thing is probably, I mean, Steve Wolfram's written a book about ChatGPT, which is probably the closest. I still have problems with it, but it's the closest theory as to why this might work. And of course, he's been doing this for what, over 20 years now.
Oh, he has.
Pushing this stuff. And he does think he's got the answer to everything.
He does, yeah.
Which is always the way.
Quite literally, of course, yeah.
Of course, yes.
Yes.
But I spent Christmas writing or adapting an algorithm which was based on his stuff and the work of an educationalist called Sugata Mitra, who was a physicist originally. And Mitra told me about this paper that he wrote before he became famous for doing something else in educational technology. And this is stuck with me ever since. And so over Christmas, I decided to write my own algorithm of what he was describing.
Yeah.
And it was basically a fractal which was self-referential, referring to its future, to its own future.
Yeah.
And the behavior of this thing is extraordinary. And damn it, if I can find the blessed thing now. I was looking at it earlier, and let me see if I can find it. Maybe I'll look for that as I'm dealing with the next question.
Yeah, yeah. But no, I find the world that we're living here is absolutely fascinating, Mark. And I do the same sort of type of research as well. When I'm not doing real work, I like to be able to come up to 30, 40, 50,000 feet, trying to get an insight in terms of exactly what is happening with what I'm doing. But thanks.
Just a note on the mathematics though, because this stuff, this scalars, vectors, bivectors, trivectors, this is Grassmann algebra, which was developed into Clifford algebra late in the 19th century. And he's not here, but there's a physicist in Liverpool called Peter Rowlands who's done remarkable work with Clifford algebra and the quaternions that sit underneath Clifford algebra. We need new mathematics, and the physicists have been on to Clifford algebra for some decades now.
Yeah.
And we need this. It's a symptom of the fact that cybernetics seems to have got a bit stuck, and so a lot of current developments in science haven't necessarily fed in. But the mathematics is important, the physics is important, the biology is important.
Sure. Yeah. Thanks for that.
Okay, thank you, Mark, and thank you, Steve. David. You're muted.
Yeah, okay. Hopefully there. Now, yeah. Thanks very much. Lots of appreciation, lots of resonances, great deal that I don't fully understand and never have, but I'm hoping if I talk incoherently for a while, I'll get a coherent answer somewhere, which somehow happens. So I'm intrigued by your unease with constructivism, which I have felt. It very well describes the way we seem to approach reality and truth, but it's not really that fashionable to believe in the ideals of reality and truth, which leads to a rather dangerous reversal, which is almost a kind of anything goes thing. So I've constructivized this so it's as good as your stuff, which is one of those dangerous defaults that you tend to get with sophisticated things, which are never fully digested. I was interested in you talking about the potential differences between whatever we're going to be able to do with AI and what we can do with this brain thing, which is with all the synapses. I mean, the latest I've heard is about 800 trillion connections when you multiply brain cells by synapses. And so on, whether that's a fundamental bit of it, how far there is a difference between words, logic, and doing kind of dancing with reality. I was always intrigued by Dan Berry's experiments when she found that people who could verbalize the operation of her sugar factories or whatever it was with delayed negative feedback, often were less good at controlling the parameters so that it came within adequate variables than those people who couldn't, but could just do it. It's like, you know, you can be a sports coach, but you can't necessarily jump 7 feet or a sports commentator. And the noise thing kind of intrigues me, because I think, was it Monbiot in Chance of Necessity? He talked about evolution coming out of effectively using transforming stuff out of noise. And I feel, you know, you when we talk about probability or non-computability, Wolfram's stuff, some things you just allegedly can't get to except by running them in real time. But very often, you know, you can put them within bounds, even though, you know, your algorithm waves around forever, you know, the butterfly is flapping its wings or whatever. There are certain things which are extraordinarily unlikely to happen, or within an equation, the thing will sort of, you know, wander around within certain limits. Do any of these things either give us ways through or suggest that we throw in the towel and go in another direction as far as you're concerned?
Well, I think this is why we need a kind of algebra, and you know, just to come back to my answer to was it Steve before, the relationship between these things, which are at different orders of dimensionality, is something which a number of other scientists are looking at, particularly the physicists. And it's something, you know, if John Torday's got his hand up to ask the next question, so you know, it's something which he would talk to as well. Dennis Noble's work in biology is very close to this, you know, and actually look at von Förster. It is actually all there.
So basically, I go and find out what Clifford algebra is.
Yeah, there's Clifford algebra. Well, ask ChatGPT. It's very good.
Yeah.
And in fact, there's no excuse for not knowing anything now, because this stuff can teach anything. You know, and you know, this is how I've been doing it. It's amazing. You just need a bit of time.
Yeah.
Actually, just Steve, just to come back to the Wolfram thing, I just want to show you. I found my fractal.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Because this is I can't remember which rule this is now, but it's one of the Wolfram rules. It is slightly modified to look at its future. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to draw on the screen a kind of shape. It could be any kind of shape. I'll do a little squiggle like it was number 8. There we go. And I'm going to start a fractal process which is going to draw a kind of Sierpinski triangle. But that 8 is in the future of this Sierpinski triangle. And watch what happens. And I don't know why. And he didn't know why.
Yeah.
It's absolute magic. And but what we're looking at with AI is this kind of recursive algorithm. So, and it has properties that you cannot predict. You cannot identify.
Exactly.
That they are there. Now, more remarkable, I'll wait for a more suitable moment. I'm going to stop it now. I'm going to draw a different kind of shape. I'm going to draw a square here.
Yeah.
I could draw a square anywhere. And then start it going again. Watch what it does now. So there's my square, but you'll find that my squiggle, my number 8, will also be there. And you can keep on going. And it will oscillate with these things. And you know, I sent this to Lou Kaufman and he was very intrigued. But yeah, the mathematics behind this stuff is very weird and very, you know, there's something important there. I just wanted to show that.
In their example, Mark, the algorithm itself is fixed. The algorithm itself is not changing.
No, there's nothing funny about the algorithm.
It's just creating, and then you're just rerunning it. Yeah.
Self-reflexive algorithm.
Yeah. Yeah.
Fascinating. Thank you, Mark and Stephen and David. We had Josh before. I don't know if David wants to finish. Josh is not longer with the hand in. So
I've got-
David, yeah, Steve.
Angela, yeah, I've got another question. Mark, you were talking before about locality and non-local, right?
Yeah.
Are you aware of the work of Stuart Hameroff and Roger Penrose?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. And really, consciousness is the collapse of the wave function. So my take on that,
So they say.
the collapse of the wave function is creating the material world that we live in, and I use that concept within the VSM as really the Markov blanket that sits between system 4 and system 3.
Yeah.
So I'm using that to be able to collapse the wave function, and that then becomes the innovation that we use to take the business into the next time period.
Yeah. There's nothing wrong with playing with these ideas and these.
No, I don't think so. No, exactly. I like to get a
Um,
hold of something. That's all. Yes.
And we should be playing. That is the essence of cybernetics, is to play
Yeah.
with things.
Yeah. I think the important thing is when we do that as well, sorry, Mark, is that we can join the dots together with the story. We're building a narrative, and it's just like an hallucination, right? This could be no doubt this is a hallucination, but the thing is we can underpin it with we can ground it. It's just how we language it. And I'm pretty okay with doing that. I do that all the time.
I want to use this opportunity because we've been having some conversations in a little research group we have on Fridays with Steve and Martin Piffner and Angus Jenkinson and Jose Perez Rios and John Walker and me. And I will really like to invite Steve to continue this conversation in the next webinar series in 2025, because I think that it will be fascinating after listening to Mark to listen to Steve and see the way that he's developing ideas about BSM and artificial intelligence. So would you accept, Steve, coming to...
No, I mean, actually, I'll even select the topic now because it's very topical for all of us. And I'm looking at agentic workflows, Mark. That's going to be our next.
Very interesting. All right.
Yeah.
I mean, what we're doing with AI at the moment is we're rewiring the workflows in organizations.
Sure.
And we don't know the effect that that's going to have.
Yeah.
It's going to be a very, very messy process because people are going to be playing with this stuff, independently. They'll be doing little bits of work with it. There'll be all sorts of very subtle changes to organizational structures, and actually keeping track of that is going to be a real challenge.
Yeah. And I'm applying that to the actual VSM itself. So each system is an agent within this environment, and I'm using I'm using the OpenAI platform at the moment for doing that. And I'm bringing into that Teams integrity. I've got a protocol for agents to talk to each other, so I can actually mediate the interactions between them. And I've got surprise, and I've got really the navigatability of the system through a very complex space. So I'm trying to bring all these together in a very sort of purist way, as how I use the VSM, how I sort of conceptualize stuff as VSM.
Yeah, it's interesting with integration, because I think I had a discussion with Elena or maybe Angela, I can't remember, because obviously you've been doing a lot of this stuff.
I have, yes.
And in the original design, and I know that Elena was instrumental in this, they used personal construct theory and repertory grids. Well, you can do all of that stuff with this. That personal transducer that I showed you at the beginning, it can produce a repertory grid. It can have a go at having a list of personal constructs for your virtual character and see how those personal constructs unfold in virtual environments. You can do all of that.
Yeah.
And it's not just that, think about Colin Eden and Ackerman, that's the soda. All of those things are doable too. It really, there's a whole field, there needs to be a big effort to revisit old work.
Sure, yeah. And I think the biggest challenge is using the work of Paul Pangaro on conversation theory, is to be able to reach an agreement over an understanding. And I think that's a challenge in itself, creating a shared white space to be able to facilitate the conversation. Otherwise, we're talking about different things and we're agreeing on something that we don't understand, which is a complete waste of time.
Yeah. Actually, I don't know if you've seen very recently, there was a lovely article on PASC, which Paul was part of.
Yes.
which I'll put in the chat if nobody else knows it. But this is nice.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Fascinating, Stephen and Mark. We have a last question for Peter before we finish.
Thanks. Yeah, fascinating, Mark. Thank you so much for that. Last year, I started thinking about archives of cybernetics as an initiative that ASC came up with, and then I started reaching out globally, and it's on my mind. And as you've just talked about revisiting old work, as it were, or previous thinkers, and playing with ChatGPT, this has been the topic of conversation I've had with Paul and many others about how we gather up, if you will, these cybernetic works into a place where we can all access them and play with them, and learn quickly from each other in the way that you're doing with ChatGPT. And the only way to learn about it is to play with it. And I've been playing with as many, I like Brilliant.ai. I've just done that for the presentation next week.
Okay.
Great.
Yeah.
And and then to share it with this. Anyway, how do we do that? And who would like to play in that space in developing like at some form of, I don't know whether it's a Pascal interface or the kind of thing you're just demonstrating there, Mark, about accessing all the cybernetic resources and people and so on and so forth. I mean, I think we need to have some kind of active group project. Anyway,
I agree. We've tried to do this many times. I mean, you'll remember Ranulph wanted to set up some sort of group of linking all the different cybernetics groups. 10 years ago now, he was trying to do that.
Yeah.
Part of the problem, I think we have to be clear about the problem. Part of the problem is the different cybernetics groups. Because it's rather uncybernetic to have a society of cybernetics in many ways. It's in a way we should be out in the world spreading what we do with people who've never heard of cybernetics.
No, I agree with you. I mean, I'm doing that in the ocean world.
So if we started from that principle and said, no, we're not going to create a super group, we've got to do something else. And I don't know what that something else is. But I know that creating the centralized archive or the coordination, we tried it, and it I don't know. I mean, others will have a view, and I kind of slightly, I apologize in a way because I do slightly keep my distance from these things because I don't particularly like academic societies. But
well, that's a whole other story. Yeah, right.
But I think our job is to be useful.
And
somehow
Yeah, but there is not impossible, just to close this conversation, that we can approach that idea from a truly cybernetic perspective. That is not creating a central library when someone is going to be the administrator of all the cybernetic knowledge in the world, but on the contrary, creating a software as a context for self-organized cyberneticians to sort of contribute with whatever they have, whatever the experiences they have, to learn together. I mean, sort of, if we could create a kind of wiki or a kind of platform in which people could just go visit, pop in, contribute without having to design a centralized artifact. Perhaps it's not an impossible dream. Yep.
It may not. Maybe it's an AI model. Maybe it's an AI model that's decentralized and distributed, and gets trained every now and then on the latest stuff. There's an idea. I mean, I have to say, actually, this is the nicest cybernetics group I know. So just before
well, thank you very much. This is really
just a very quick question to Mark. Mark, do you leverage the hallucinations that can be generated by using ChatGPT? Because I find them great. It's just like brainstorming. You can just throw
I love it. Yeah.
We are intelligent enough to be able to throw these ideas out, but sometimes it can actually get you to move in a new direction. So I don't have an issue. We just increase the temperature and we can be over the space, or we can turn it down to 0. Just a thought.
I just wish I could get it to swear. That's all.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, Peter. An idea that we can come back to that idea. Yep, and talk more about that. Perhaps worth to have a webinar about that as well. Yep. So anyway, thank you all for coming, for being with us. We will put in the web the recording of the webinar, and looking forward to see you again. Thank you very much.
Lovely.
Thank you,
Okay,
Mark.
thank you. Thank
Yeah,
you.
thanks,
Okay.
Mark. Thanks, Angela.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much. Thank you.